Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's edition of the DSSC Insight series, the monthly webinar appointment organized by the Data Spaces Support Center. Today, we're very excited to bring you one of the most anticipated webinars to date, which revolves around the cooperation between the Data Space Support Center and the Simpl initiative. Now, many people in our community have been asking us to explain more into detail the level of cooperation between the DSSC and Simpl. And this is why we invited today our guest speaker, Manuel Mateo Goyer, acting head of unit for cloud and software at DigiConnect at the European Commission, who will help us tackle the topic in a bit more details. Now, let's move to the agenda, today's agenda. We will start with an introduction by Gianfranco Cecconi, the Executive Director of the Data Spaces Support Center. We will move on with a presentation from Manuel on the updates on the Simpl initiative from the presentation that he already delivered in Darmstadt at our flagship event, the Data Spaces Symposium. Then we will move on to a conversation between Gianfranco and Manuel which will explore the current synergies and the road ahead for both initiatives. And then we will move on to a Q&A session. So just as a reminder, you can ask the questions throughout the webinar. And you can also use the chat box, which is at the bottom right of the Zoom that you're connected to. We will try our best to answer all the questions throughout the webinar. Any unanswered question will be dealt with in the dedicated Q&A session at the very end. Now, before I give the floor to Gianfranco, a couple of housekeeping items. So first off, this webinar is recorded. You will be able to access the recording of this webinar and all the past webinars on our YouTube channel. And you can access our YouTube channel through the QR code in the slide. You can also see all the recordings of the past, our yearly event, the Data Spaces Symposium, on the YouTube channel. So please feel free to go and explore all that the channel has to offer. And last but not least, if you want to stay up to date with everything, all the news from the Data Spaces Support Center, you can subscribe to our newsletter. It's easy. You will see my colleagues will post a link in the chat, or you can also scan the QR code in the slide. So you will learn more about everything that we do, from events to our latest deliverables and much more. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Gianfranco. Gianfranco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in Europe or in the world. As Anna introduced me correctly, my name is Gianfranco Cecconi. I'm the International Data Spaces Association's Chief Solution Officer, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Data Space Support Center. For Project Coordinator, Professor Boris Otto, for the many partners in our team, and of course, ITO service, as well as our users. I will be your host for today together with Anna. Before we go to Manuel, I wanted to spend a few minutes on a point of how, let's say, our project also relate to others. If there is one criticism we at the DSSC get sometimes, is that the team is perhaps too theoretical in our guidance, that we pitch beautiful frameworks, but fall short of supporting the part of our audience who are already perhaps knee-deep in the challenge of joining a data space or, God forbid, building one. Well, we understand our, let's say, our impatient friends, but like Jerry Maguire missing his wife in the film of the same name, we can't do everything alone. DSSC is one of dozens of initiatives in the EU and beyond, each of which has its speciality across data quality, semantic data, data interoperability, data space interoperability. Yeah, there are different things, and even more. Each of these initiatives has chosen its battle. And the battle that the European Commission chose for DSSC is to research, distill, and provide guidance on the functionalities required for data space interoperability and supporting the EU-funded initiatives in this space that we call the community of practice. You must have heard us using this term before. When you will be watching the recording of this session, perhaps you can pause the video on this slide and ensure that you are aware of the many assets and services available to you that you can use as part of our scope of work. But if you followed us over the last few months, you also have heard from us many times about the blueprint, that is the collection of specifications of functional building blocks and components that you would expect to cover most needs of a data space across technology, business, organizations, and so on. So where is it that the DSSC stops being that theoretical, and where is it that we get down to business? Where is it that the rubber meets the road, so to speak? If you were with us in the previous Insight series a few weeks ago, you know already that the DSSC opened the so-called toolbox for submission. The toolbox will be a catalog of known implementations, whether of technology, for example, components like software connectors, or also business and governance building blocks, for example, model contract terms that you will be able to reuse. You can submit for evaluation on our website the implementations you appreciated and trust. The ambition is that by the end of this year, the catalog of the toolbox will be complete enough to offer you multiple options of implementations across the full spectrum of functionalities required. But it does not end really there. So who works on actually delivering those implementations? Today, we meet one big part of the whole picture beyond the DSSC, the European Commission Simpl initiative. Simpl is aimed at delivering the common software that will empower those same initiatives that we support and beyond. Because it is open source, anybody will be able to reuse it as well. Manuel will simply tell us more about this without me going too deep on that. So Manuel was also already our guest at the big annual event in Darmstadt in Germany. So you may have seen from us before, but we want to know more about the progress from the project over the last few months and what is coming soon. So without further ado, Manuel, please let us get down to business with Simpl.
So this is where I need to press plenty of nice buttons all at once, and where hopefully you confirm, Gianfranco, that you see my slides.
Yes, although there is a sort of a little box in the top right that covers some of your slides, like an overlay or something.
Okay, that's weird.
Now it's gone.
Now it's gone. Fantastic. So I guess it was more lag than an overlay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much, Gianfranco, for the presentation, and more importantly for inviting me here to be today. It's a real pleasure, and but I must confess, unexpected pleasure, because the DSSC and Simpl in the vision of the Commission was always meant to work together. So, so this is the external materialization of that vision, and of course, there's a lot more going behind the scenes, and in the Q&A, you and I, Gianfranco, I'm sure we'll be able to get a little bit more into the details. It's not the first time, as Gianfranco said. We already did some Simpl presentation back in Darmstadt in mid of March. So what I'm going to try to do a bit to set the scene today is to mix what would be a catch-up for the ones who missed Darmstadt, and at the same time complement with what has been going on since. Voila, with a view that we're all a bit up to speed by the time we start the Q&A. So, reminder, data spaces in a DSSC setup, I don't feel compelled to explain to you what a data space is about, but maybe a word of where Simpl fits into that vision. And Simpl, the way I usually explain it is that it's the software that allows, or that powers, or that is behind data spaces. And you have there a few more complicated words to explain a little some of the technical characteristics of Simpl. It's about federating data ecosystems, and it's about really allowing all these to work together. Where does it fit in our big Commission data strategy? I'm sure you've all seen this slide before, which is the usual one that my colleagues that manage data spaces themselves present, where you see all the common data spaces there in the yellow boxes, all the orange legislation that has been adopted to make this a possibility from a legal point of view. And Simpl, although as the proud owner, I would say that it deserves a much bigger box, is this red box at the bottom there, which is to provide a common technical infrastructure. And I'll get back to the logic in a second. So a little bit more details about Simpl. It's open source, okay, so that it's developed and paid by the Commission, but then reusable by everyone here, but as well that anyone here can contribute to it. So that's the beauty of it. It's middleware, which means that we're not dealing with the low infrastructure details. It's something which is meant to be executed over an agnostic technical layer, so above the pure IaaS, if you want to take a shortcut in a Kubernetes environment, but others would apply. It's about data spaces, and here I'm today to discuss about data spaces only, but you see that in the definition, we use this concept of cloud to edge federation, meaning that one can imagine other cases. If you're curious, I can come back to this assumption later on. But the other dimension is this cloud to edge. It's not only about cloud, it's not only about edge, it's both at the same time, with a view that over time, we would be able as well to have a federation that goes to the far edge on the one side and beyond the cloud to as well connect high performance computing capacities. This is the core and the essence of what Simpl is about. If you start from the right-hand side, you have end users of data. And to get to that final data that is useful to them, they need an initial stakeholder provider of data. That's the top left side. They need an application provider over which to execute some type of algorithm to make this data usable for them. That's the bottom left side. And you need that application to process that data over some infrastructure, and that's the middle left side. And you see there that Simpl appears in the 4 of those boxes because it's not a central platform to which you log in. It's something that you deploy in your own infrastructure. And you see, therefore, this idea that it is decentralized. So Simpl is a bit within all the stakeholders' infrastructure, but that some features are centralized. Logically, the 3 catalogs, or if you prefer, the 3 repositories and data engines, where the data, the infrastructure, and the applications can be found and identified. Then the identity and authority, which is how do you allow participants to the data space, with which rights, under which conditions, etc. And then the vocabulary provider, which is a way to say that you need something to make sure that everybody speaks the same language. I'm sure if you're familiar with data space academic theory, this is the bread and butter of what you've learned. The value proposal of Simpl is very easy. It can be summarized as no wheel reinvention, meaning it's something that we developed, but we want it to be built over numerous existing open source initiatives. So we're conscious that there will be things that will be really for us to code. And as well, that a good part of the added value is not that much in developing code for everything, but in gluing existing open source and bring them together into a single package, if you want, of solution. The hard assumption is that interoperability comes. If I go back to this slide, if you want, all those sectors that are represented there in the middle white boxes are working on their own data space, but the idea is that they can work together as well. We're a month away from the Paris Olympics. They have a data space, and it borrows from the data space on mobility, on tourism, on cultural heritage, on local public forces, enforcement things, etc., etc. And so you need to be able to create data spaces, maybe not on the spot, because it's not something you completely improvise, but it's something where you don't want to reinvent the wheel every time you need the same data to participate into different data spaces. So this is a hard idea of interoperability. And then comes this idea of saving money and time. If you want to set up a new data space and you're typically end users who are gathering with, hey, we should work together, the last thing you want to do is to spend time looking for to reinvent the wheel, because we're on this slide, but to have to figure it out everything from scratch. And we'll come back with Gianfranco to this point. This is where the DSSC provides, if you want, the knowledge and the know-how and a step-by-step guide. And this is where Simpl provides the technical infrastructure. So far I've been discussing about Simpl as a standalone concept, but in reality, there's three different things, three different products. Simpl Open, which is the open source middleware itself. Simpl Labs, which is a deployment of Simpl Open in a sandbox environment so that people can play with it. And then instances of Simpl Open for dedicated data spaces, which we call Simpl Life. So it's our, if you want, beyond the baseline, which is Simpl, is to go the extra mile to facilitate the deployment of Simpl Open to those 6 data spaces. And those are the 6 we're working on at the moment, but we will be working on more. It's very easy to say that it's the Commission paying and developing, but the hard reality is that it's not me and my immediate colleagues doing this. We're doing this supported by a contract awarded to the companies here above, and a further one, Indra, at the bottom, which is helping us to do the quality assessment. All that I've described here is captured in this timeline for 24. It's a zoom of what's going on in the different ones. We are, so I'll come back to all of them one by one, but in short, in Simpl Open, we have started refining our requirements since a while, and we're now starting to develop the software since a couple of months. We have a proof of concept that has been demonstrated on Wednesday this week. It's still very modest. You see, there's only 2 months or 2 sprints of development, but the pipeline is now stable, robust, and will improve on a sprint by sprint basis. Simpl Life and Simpl Labs are still somehow in their infancies, in the sense that this year we're only doing feasibility studies of how this could work. With the Simpl Labs, it will end up with a proof of concept at the end of the year, but it's only otherwise paperwork, and I'll come back to what the next steps will be. I left here on the bottom a bit of highlights of how you can contribute, but there's a QR code a bit further where you can find all the interesting links. So zooming out into the future, you see the Simpl Lives and Labs, the feasibility studies this year. We anticipate to move into a deployment and execution from the end of the year, beginning of 25. So that's the yellow bit. The Simpl Open contract that we have signed at the moment runs for 3 years. Well, that's going on. And as I said earlier, we're only supporting actively six data spaces, but we anticipate to have a second, possibly a third round of further data spaces. And we have other ideas to enhance Simpl Open, which are not in the current plan. But you know, when you start getting ideas and you have the possibility to do them, those are things that we're considering. If you're curious, what we intend to do is what I said earlier about giving access to high-performance computing resources as well, to make a special extension of Simpl Open towards artificial intelligence, to connect to the Dome marketplace. If you're unfamiliar, I can say a few words about it in a moment. What are a few of the ideas that we're brainstorming with the colleagues? You will have seen in the timeline our first yearly event, which comes with this. So you can mark the date and book your flight tickets. It will be an all-day fun event in Brussels. What do I say? On the 30th of January. I've put here a bit of a teaser of what we will show you. So a live demo of the minimum viable product for Simpl Open, hopefully much more garnished than the proof of concept we demoed 2 days ago. And then a live demo of the proof of concept for Simpl Labs, and then hopefully detailed roadmaps for the 6 Simpl Live deployments. And of course, we have, as a good keynote speaker would say, quite a few things up our sleeves. I promised a QR code, so I leave it here, but this links then to our link repository where you will find all our interesting things and data. I presented in Darmstadt a bit this idea of how we are defining requirements from the business processes down to user stories and then architecture and code. This work is still going on. Those are the 11 business processes that we have developed. I'll come back to it in a second, but if you look at this slide, the logic is that you need to be able to add users, to get rid of users, to add providers of data infrastructure application. These people need to be able to add things to catalog. The end users need to be able to look for it, to use for it, etc., etc. So once you've understood that the headlines of the different processes are quite straightforward. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you see, for example, in the second line, to take them like this, you have the setup of a catalog and vocabulary infrastructure. You have a consumer searching for a catalog. You have a consumer establishing a contract with the provider of the data. I mean, all those possible interactions that you can imagine within the scheme that I mentioned. And this is an agile approach in the sense that I think the level 3 user stories, we have like 1,000 in store for them, and we could have spent the next 2 years to do an academic work really to figure out them all. But what we decided to do is to, while we develop those requirements, at the same time engage in their coding. So about the coding, we did a proof of concept. It's done. It's only 2 sprints. We work on 3 weeks based sprints. We've done 2 elements, so it's sub processes of onboarding a provider of data applications or infrastructure, and on publishing something on a resource catalog, just to see how it works, but as well because it's a fairly large contract to put the machinery in place of the developers, the quality assessment, the verification, and all that. And on the minimum viable product, we have now a scope which is stabilized, which I've not reproduced here because not because it's secret, but because we stabilized it very recently at the slide was not yet clean enough to be shown to everyone. But as you will see now in a moment, I'll explain how much this is open source and not only as a code, but as all our intentions. I've put here more for the curious people because I don't think this is the core of today, but a bit the details of what it means to onboard a provider, the steps and what it means in logical terms in the backend. Again, the same leftover slides for the idea of publishing on the catalog, and again with the same description. Simpl is open source, so you see here the link to our code repository. It's still unverified code, so be indulgent. We are putting in place a system of releases so that the curious can go to see the unverified code, which I don't think brings immediately a lot of value. But definitely the verified code will have much more value. And in the QR code that I showed earlier, you see not only the link to this code, but as well the link to where we are developing and publishing the requirements as they appear. Voila, Gianfranco, this was the short story since Darmstadt, but I voluntarily flew quickly over some things to allow the public and the questions to guide us into more detailed aspects.
Thank you, Manuel. And that was already a lot of information. I see a lot of questions coming in chat, but perhaps I want to be a bit selfish at the beginning and ask a few things myself, if you don't mind. The first is, I mean, we've been, both our projects were conceived by the Commission a lot of time ago, right? So DSSC was started about 20 months ago, and I remember Simpl being specified since the very first Digital Europe program. I guess everybody's wondering now, how will the two projects be working together?
So I like selfishness, Gianfranco. That's what makes so. You know, the idea was there since the beginning. In the first work program, the two were next to each other, and when me and my colleagues designed that work program, that was there since day one, and so it's intended since the beginning. Why so long ago until today? Well, you know, administrative delays. Simpl was a public procurement and takes more time to do than a grant as the DSSC. And to be frank, you better have first the brains before having the hands. So it's good that the DSSC kicked rolling since day one. Otherwise, I guess Simpl we would have been a bit lost without you. And I think it's really a win-win because whenever we have people approaching us like, oh, we have this new idea, but we don't know where to start, the answer is very easy. Go and see Gianfranco. And conversely, I hope that since the beginning of the year, whenever you have technical questions, you send them back to us, maybe with a caveat that it takes that we were not yet fully operational. It's not the case anymore. So maybe we mark today symbolically as the day people can reach us completely.
And without using it as an excuse, the first Digital Europe program was written practically just before COVID. There's not a little disturbance, let's say, in the planning. And then many things changed, though, in that year, I guess. To add to what I was asking, I mean, I was cheating a little because, of course, we've been working together for a while and we know what we're doing. For the audience at home, I would say there are, let's say, 5 big areas where we are synchronizing. The first is the specification of best practices and requirements gathering. We, on the DSSC side, need to do it by listening to our community, and Simpl on their side, of course, needs to also collect requirements specific to the implementation. And because of Simpl Live, they have also specific requirements of those data spaces funded by the EU that are already deployed, already decided to be deployed using Simpl. We're working together in different ways on the evaluating and selecting implementation. So I explained about the toolbox earlier, we need to catalog in a relatively neutral way. Actually, and we will be cataloging also commercial options, because there's a lot to learn there as well. While on the Simpl side, it's more specific, it must be open source. It's quite a significant difference, and they need to use it. While for us, it's perhaps even too easy. We just need to list them, right? There's an element of community and stakeholder management. Both the projects have a significant community. Simpl needs to foster the open source and the whole set of users that will support the development of Simpl also in the future. One good question in the audience, we come back later to, actually asks what the sustainability of the project beyond the funding of the commission. That's also quite interesting. And to close, everything that relates to communicating. We both have events, and we need to make Europe know that our resources exist and you need to use them. Otherwise, what's the point? And of course, everything we do for coordinating strategically, the fact that we can support each other, and while the two projects are still so new, educate the audience to each other as well. My personal guess is that for many months, possibly years, there will be a lot of curious colleagues around, people, professionals, community of practice, that will probably just want to work in absorbing mode. So whether you are DSSC or Simpl, just teach me something, just show me how it's done. And that will be an audience we will share, I believe, for some time. Because as long as there is content that is good, they will come to us. That's maybe my summary of this. You describe well, Manuel, what happened since Darmstadt. Perhaps it's more interesting to also look at the future, right? That is, what's happening in the next few months. I don't know how in the future you want to go. And I'm sure that I see in chat some questions that will go in more detail, but give us please the general idea of what's happening in the next few months.
Yeah, so the next few months is, let me put the 3 time perspectives until the end of the year, and then until 27, and then afterwards. And this is how I will answer the question from Niels about the sustainability of Simpl. The next few months is on Simpl Open to move from a proof of concept to a minimum viable product. It's still done in open source, but I would expect every open source guru is telling me you won't have external serious contribution until you have a minimum viable product. So we're open to listen to everyone, but I don't expect that we will have a huge community before the end of the year. So we will keep on doing this in the absence of anyone, even in the absence of anyone. And on Simpl Open, the current contract signed and being executed has got a pipeline until end of 27. So no, sorry, until end of 26. So that's it's 3 years starting 1st of January this year. So we have there a long pipeline. In parallel, we intend to finish the feasibility study of Simpl Labs and the 6 data spaces, the so-called Simpl Live, which we intend to then convert into new contracts for their deployment. Because I tend to focus on the tech side, I think what you will see over the summer, so let's take an appointment to after we all return from Mediterranean beaches, is that we will have a shiny new web presence as well, because you don't build an open community at all levels with a dark website, and so we are going to make a huge effort in shifting from amateurish tools to real professional grade tools in that perspective, that will make easier for people to interact and follow us more closely. As I said, next year on the open, it's clear. On the Simpl Life and Labs, I mentioned it twice, so that's clear. And then the further ideas for pipelines, it's more data spaces. We have a bunch of them in the pipeline. It concerns energy, mobility, agriculture, Green Deal, you name them, but that's it. I mentioned extensions to Simpl Open, probably under artificial intelligence. So the idea conceptually, in a few words, is to allow data spaces to use complex AI algorithms, including Gen AI models, and execute them over high performance computing infrastructure. The whole thing without leaving Simpl or your data space. So to really integrate this whole approach, and you were asking Gianfranco what has changed since we first designed the work program. We already had those ideas, but I think now that we see day after day all the progresses made on AI, it reinforces us in the idea that those tools should really be put in the hands of everyone. And not only of large companies, because of course the ecosystem of data spaces is made of many SMEs, and we think that this is where it really makes a lot of sense to use them. Because if you think about an SME without its data space ecosystem, logically wouldn't have access to a lot of data to train or to use AI algorithms, while to the contrary, in a broader environment, that's much easier. There's maybe since we're here and there's almost no one listening, there's maybe another concept which is maybe more on the public sector side, something that we call Eurocloud, which is the idea that member states, public sector organizations in general have got more difficulty than others, than private sector, to move their systems to the cloud because it's because of a lack of trust. And the assumption over which we're working is that if you are a public sector organization and you don't trust the commercial actors in the market, I don't want to enter on the whys, but it's a very common concern, that maybe you instead trust your neighbor public organization. So that, let me give you an example, an hospital in Strasbourg, which is using a public regional data infrastructure. Okay, great. But that regional data infrastructure of Alsace, or le Grand Est, as it's called now in France, why should it be limited by those borders? Why can an hospital in Bonn not use that data infrastructure as well? And so it's this border abolition on sharing infrastructure that we're trying to look at. And if you now go back to the idea of Simpl, it's really a simplified model where it's really in the slide that I showed earlier, an end data user is using data from a third party, applications from a third party, and infrastructure from a third party. But here I'm removing the two initial assumptions. I go with my data, with my algorithms, and I'm using the infrastructure of someone else that I trust to do that. And this is the kind of, from a Simpl point of view, it's a simplified use case. It's not really a data space because it's not about I share my data with you. It's I keep my data. So it's not a data space. It's a real cloud to edge federation. But because you're in a public sector setup, it brings tremendous new complications from an organizational and legal point of view. Is this a public procurement or not? How do we do the billing in a public sector concept? It's not easy, and so on and so on.
Thanks, Manuel. It's a long answer, but also the scope of the work you have in front of you is quite big. So trying to be more synthetic than that probably would be sacrificing some of the aspects of it. So I recognize it, appreciate it. If you don't mind, I believe we are ready to go down into the questions in the audience, and I recognize also a few patterns that I believe may be addressed by another question that I have for you. That is the relationship between Simpl as Simpl Open in particular in this case is a project, and the many open source software components that you may be able to reuse in the future. Someone asks if you already decided some of those. And the word itself, middleware, sometimes personally, I would say diminishes your work, because you're not just putting the stuff together, you're also doing significant selection work that is not secondary in complexity, I would say. Do you know, can you share the general approach to this, and just to answer some of those questions, if some of those components have been chosen already?
Yeah, so conveniently, the two sprints that I showed earlier, we've picked them. We had to pick them. We had to pick two to begin with, and we picked them because the underlying technology that we picked was straightforward and easy to decide without making sacrifices, if you want. But we know that now for the minimum viable product, we need to make harder choices or more complex ones. So the short answer is that we haven't started making those hard choices, but we're about to do. And now to explain and communicate and share them with everyone will be at least on a two-layer basis. On the first layer, we want to satisfy the legitimate tech detailed questions. So we will share the details of those implementation and the documentation. So all those will be answered, but we want to answer them as well in a much more synthetic manner to be understandable by the non-technicians, so that questions such as, oh, are you using the Eclipse connector? Yes or no? Are you using the Gaia X material? Yes or no? All those can be open. I think it brings us to a fundamental question, which is, are all those tools that I mentioned and many more, are they all compatible in between themselves? Where there's a gap in between them, it's easy. It's for us to develop. Where there's only one, I mean, let's see, but provided the tool is okay, let's reuse it. But the question is, if there's incompatibilities or overlaps in between them, how we deal with them. So this is, I know it's the question that I always get. So we're getting there. We're gathering next week. We have a workshop to delve particularly on those questions next week in Brussels, and we will hopefully get there. But I don't have yet today the answer to that.
That's clear. And so also to say, recap for myself, and I believe some in the audience will appreciate, there is a sort of a line that in an ideal world connect ideally DSSC to the implementations that we'll be choosing, because again, in an ideal world, all functionalities are captured in the DSSC blueprint, including what we call components that are aggregate of building blocks that usually are found together. Typically, a connector, the space connector, is one of those components. If we're lucky, the toolbox will be complete and we list implementations of those components. So you may have, I don't know, the control plane of data spaces as a general functionality. And then perhaps still in the DSSC, we may be saying that some specific technology implements it, say the data space protocol by IDSA. And then who implements the data space protocol? In the toolbox, we see, I don't know, the Eclipse data space component does it, perhaps the firewall connector does it, and the engineering connector does it, and so on. And then at some point, you will have let's say the curse to have to choose one. Okay, and this line closes. And I also presume that not all of your choices may need to be forever. At this point in time, you need something that you can rely upon, and you may need, unfortunately, to change your mind at some point in the future, depending on how this development evolves. None of these components have years of history. Like, it's not like you need to choose between say Microsoft Office or Google Docs. It's not that simple at all, despite
No.
what your name suggests.
No, absolutely. I wouldn't change anything to what you said. I think I would simply add that there's a bit of a iterative character into you know, to arrive to that stability where the blueprint and Simpl are completely aligned. It requires a bit of iterations, and as well to add that we don't always need to pick one or the other solution where they overlap. It might be the case that in some situations we say we foresee in Simpl the deployment of the two, and it's up to the data space to pick. Because in a couple of discussions I've been involved, what appeared is that there are solutions that not only overlap, but that already have a strong deployment history behind them, with not necessarily the same communities and with no obvious winner on technical qualities. It's just that it's been different approaches adopted by different groups, and it would be very difficult to tell one or the other, now you stop and you align on the other because this is it.
Yeah. So probably in most cases you will be able, or hopefully you will be able to go down to the point of choosing a standardized technology of some kind, and then enable data spaces to implement their favorite implementation as long as it is compliant with the technology. In the same way, we can visit a website using Safari or Chrome or Microsoft Edge, whatever, because HTTP and HTTPS are so mature that we don't need to worry, and HTML the same for the web page rendering and so on. So just to try to make a simple example for the non-techies. Just looking again to the questions from the audience, many asking where to find out more, and I see that our colleagues are responding punctually to each of those requests, the website, the GitHub repository. I wanted to go back to the question by Niels about the sustainability of the project, because when I read the requirements, the very original requirements for Simpl, I thought, oh my God, the Commission has become very courageous. They want to give this software, after spending millions on it, they want to give it to the community. How does that work?
Your slightly tainted, ironic comment, Gianfranco, is right. I heard this so many times. Oh, but the Commission will not really do something open, or will release the whole thing at the end in an obscure place, etc. No. We said we would. We are doing. The links that I shared and that my colleagues are relaying are the living proof of that. So voila. Now, the sustainability. I think, I mean, again, in between us, I think the long-term vision is that the Commission hasn't got the it's not in the treaties that the Commission needs to deal with this. You know, we need to deal with industrial development, with innovation, etc., but not necessarily with the management of Simpl. I think first, it's a very valid question, and it's something that we should take very seriously, because I know that the people who look to deploy the solutions are looking at the long-term thing. They don't want to deploy a tool that is discontinued in 12 or 24 months. So it's a complete valid thing. I think for the coming, at least until end of 27, which coincides with the end of the financial framework, and which is a little bit our budgetary end, the end of our visibility on budget terms, there's a guarantee. You can be fairly certain that this is not going to stop in any way. So this is moving forward. Now, whether the Commission at some point decides to move it away, yes, it's in our carton boxes and in our brains. I think, and this is me, Manuel, it's not like we've taken a final decision, but I see two ways this could go. One could think about passing the baton to, because in the end, it's an open source kind of ownership that you pass. And it's not something we need to really give, but it's more a symbolic baton that we pass to an existing community. or a new community, I don't care, but a foundation or something like this. It's something, for example, we did some years ago with Fireware, which was extensively developed and with European funds, and is now a completely independent instance. There's another possibility is that Simpl becomes what is called the NEDIC, European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, which is those public-private partnerships which have a legal existence, a legal autonomy, and where the Commission could keep on putting funds, and where public actors, member states, regions, cities, and private sector stakeholders could keep on contributing to it, and that and then that consortium could then decide again to do development by itself or to pass contracts with the third parties or etc. So it's a little bit two models. I think the main difference in between the two is whether you keep a public sector active participation in the management of it. And my polite guess as to where the decision will go is whether we see more uptake by industry and the private sector, or if this becomes a killer app in the public sector and in the Eurocloud type of things that thoughts that I mentioned earlier. But this is just me brainstorming on a sunny Friday afternoon. Time will tell.
And I guess we share with you the challenge, by the way. All of the work that the DSSC is doing on our side cannot simply be put in a drawer when the project finishes, right? So the success for both projects is a combination of what we do being used, where the projects run and are funded by the Commission, and seeing our communities take over when we are close to completion or when we are ready, in general, depending on the maturity of our assets. And I guess that will be very satisfying to watch when it happens. I wish you the same luck I need on our side for that to happen. We have still about 10 minutes, so I can still make a few people in chat happy. So one question I see, and I am very curious myself of, is beyond the 6 data spaces that are already aimed at Simpl Live, if there are plans for what comes next. I seem to remember to have seen Simpl, for example, referred to in requirements for other implementations of deployment, as we say, of data spaces funded by the EU. Do you know already, or if you can talk about it, so maybe perhaps confidential?
Yeah, so there's no secret. They're listed in the work program of 24. So if you go and look at that paragraph of Simpl, we're looking at actively supporting the energy, agri, mobility, and I believe we've written down as well the Green Deal. But again, I think the way we framed them was as an example. Usually in work programs, when it's an example, is that there's an intention behind. But so it's not necessarily limiting, and there's here and there colleagues that from time to time approach us telling us, you know, maybe one of those days we're going to ask you to help. And this is a bit now internal kitchen. It's a framework contract by the Commission, not by DG Connect or not by my team. So if tomorrow DG X or Y or Z wants to come and use our framework contract to say, well, you know, it's tailor-made to develop a data space. Here is an extra budget to execute a contract on Simpl Life on this, on that part. The instrument, the contract as an instrument is there for that. So my intentions are not necessarily the same as what others have in mind.
Okay. I'm sure that it will be fine. I believe I can add one to the list, that is the skills data space. I believe to have read somewhere that in the requirements they are asked the future say, vendor that will win the procurement will be required to use Simpl or something like that. I don't want to say anything. I hope I'm
Yes,
not-
sorry. So I didn't mention that, but whenever we write now grants for data spaces, we write down this requirement. But then in those cases, we rely on the grantee to use Simpl without our active help. And by the way, I've seen this idea of using Simpl in the in the Spanish call for national data spaces initiatives. So it was at national level and regional. I think the Basque country did it as well. So the seed is planted and hopefully will be more and more reused.
So no pressure for you then.
No, not at all. Not at all. Completely cool.
Perfect. We talked about live. I have a question on labs that also connects to something I read in the chat, that is, to what degree labs, besides, of course, anybody will be able to download open by definition, it's open source, but to what degree labs will be available for the learners among us? Because I believe you said that it is for experimentation and learning, but who will be allowed to use it?
So,
if you know.
Yeah. So maybe let me take a minute to re-explain labs. Labs as, let's put it like this, 3 functionalities. The first one is the one you were hinting at, Gianfranco, is to offer a quick and easy way to try a data space. I think the typical use case is that most data spaces are not born in the minds of techies, but are born in the minds of end users. We are the European Federation of Medicaments, of logisticians, of farmers, of of cattle, blah, blah. And they suddenly see a need for to cooperate and exchange data and set up a data space. And in the absence of Simpl labs, they would be down to listen to use cases, listen to others having done things. But the beauty of Simpl labs is that it allows them with minimal expense to come and say, here are 2 random data sets, and we would like to have a simulated data space with 10 actors, 2 providers, 2 apps, and let's play with it. And that's the basic idea. Then there's another case, which is existing data spaces that are functioning since some time, but which have not used the DSSC blueprint or Simpl as a in their foundations, and want to get close and want a bit of an assessment of how far they are from the vanilla deployment of Simpl Open. And so it's for them to do a kind of conformity assessment, a conformity verification of their tools. There's a third use case, which is, I'm a company, and I heard in Darmstadt actually a very interesting situation of a car manufacturer who was telling me, listen, with my production side of the company, I'm part of a data space, Catena X, not to name it, on the car manufacturing and collaboration with the suppliers. Fine, easy to understand. But as well with my lease branch, I'm part of a tourism ecosystem where the people with who I exchange data are airline companies, hotel providers, etc., etc. And I don't want to duplicate my my infrastructure, my connections, and my data sharing. I want this to be done from the one and same tools. And so the idea is for them to say, hang on, I've got those 2 data ecosystems to which I want to belong. Are the tools the same? Are they compatible? How can I maximize the synergies in between the 2?
That's super useful when it's available. What's the timing for labs?
So labs feasibility end of the year, and we don't have yet the roadmap of how fast we could deploy it. But I think I'm looking for end of 25 to have something up and running.
We need to be a little patient still, and if you want it to come faster, just come and contribute to the software, right? That's how you do it, right? It's open source. Before we go into the very last question, I want to remind everybody in the audience that all of the links and the websites and the resources we referenced, of course, will be made available. You will be able to go on to the Simpl website section on Futurium also to find out more. So you don't risk losing any of this, and the recording of this call will be made available later. There's one last question I wanted to answer, and then we need to close. That is with reference to collaboration with the industry. I believe that many in the audience may have this kind of prejudice that because this is funded by the Commission, it's a public sector thing. It's not for me, right? If I'm in industry, is that the case?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was saying from a couple of questions I've seen, I see transpiring a kind of a prejudice about Simpl, that is because it's funded by a public institution, nothing to do with industry. Industry is not, and you're not interested in collaborating with industry. What's the picture exactly? So I have to deal with the same kind of questions sometimes. There is no reason why an EU-funded project that should
not at all.
Collaboration. Yeah,
no, not at all. I think so. First, it's, as I said, it's developed by the public sector, but in reality, you've seen the names of the private sector developing it. So, and then I think when you look at the composition of all the data spaces, the distinction public versus private sector is not ridiculous. It exists. But there are so many that are where the two sectors coexist and co-work that voila, it's I think we're developing a tool for both sectors. I think where you might see a bit of a difference, so the Simpl Open is really for everyone. I think where you can see a bit of a difference is at the moment of doing Simpl Live projects and support. I don't see why we would actively help the private sector deploy something for their own needs. I mean, I see a few reasons, but the default answer would be probably less. While, for example, in the health sector, or I mean, some sectors like I'm thinking about health because we're working on it at the moment, or the public procurement data space as well, where it's public money. So in the end, that it comes from my pocket or from the pocket of the colleagues who are working on something else. It's in the end, the interest is the European interest, so doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and similar situation as for us at DSSC. The many initiatives that are fully in private sector have so much to teach us, and there's so much to capture, reuse, and learn. There's no specific barrier to extend the experimentation and learning from one side to the other. With that, I would close our session for today. Thanks again, Manuel, for being with us. I understand that if we did not answer the full set of questions, you will find, I believe you have a space on Futurium where you can follow up further. I can do anything else but wishing you good luck for the work that comes, and I believe we will be seeing a lot of each other.
And taking appointment for next time, right?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Manuel, and
fantastic,
thanks
Gianfranco.
to everybody at home and in your offices. I hope you enjoyed it and that it was useful for you. See you next time for the next Insight Series webinar.
Good afternoon to everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, Gianfranco, for the invite. Bye-bye.